Life Audio.
Get in the practice of saying practice instead of try. It's such a gentle mind shift, but such a powerful one to remind us that trying, you can't measure it. It does seem unending. It seems exhausting just saying it, but practicing, we've all done something that we practice at and got better at.
As women, we're pulled in every direction, and we often put pressure on ourselves to do all and be all. We may feel overwhelmed or isolated and wonder, is it just me? Do other women feel this way too? God Hears Her from Our Daily Bread Ministries is a community of women who, through honest conversations, personal stories, and biblically based resources, encounter God's grace and flourish together as a sisterhood in Christ. Visit GodHearsHer.org to experience podcasts, blogs, devotionals, and more that encourage us to lean on Jesus, the one who turns life's messiness into meaning. Again, that's GodHearsHer.org.
Hello and welcome to the Encourager Podcast, where we have encouraging conversations to help you joyfully harmonize your home and work life. I'm your host, Rebecca Scott. I'm a wife, mother, designer, coach, and author. I'm here to help encourage and empower you to confidently make decisions that work for you and your stage of life, whatever that might be. Hello, encouragers. On today's podcast, I have my guest, Jen Rogers, who's going to tell us a little bit about what a 90-day sprint is, which is not a foreign word. I know that you guys have heard this, but I personally have been really circling this probably over the last 2 years. And then you guys heard my earlier podcast about why I stopped planning 5 to 10 years out, because it's just so not concrete and it's so blurry. And so I've really been loving just doing the 3-year because I can kind of compartmentalize what goals would fit in each year, building up to whatever that project is or whatever that goal is. And so my guest, Jen Rogers, is a really good coach. She's a mother, she's a wife, and she's also a podcaster. And originally, Jen and I met through a platform and we connected very closely, very quickly. And so I think you're really going to enjoy our guest today. Welcome, Jen Rogers.
Hey, thank you so much for having me.
Okay, so tell us a little bit about a 90-day sprint, and a little bit in our pre-interview chat, encouragers, we were talking about how this is a foreign concept to some, but I think it's so silly, is we get to the month of September and October and we're like, okay, we're going to wait until January 1. And I'm always like, what? Why? No. You can start now. So tell us a little bit about your version of a 90-day sprint.
So you know how highly successful people do things differently? So if you are going with the crowd, you probably are going to get the same results that the crowd gets. And in fact, we know biblically, we're told that when you follow the crowd, things get really dangerous. The crowd turns. They're for you 1 minute and they're not with you the next. So when you're leveraging in 90 days, you know what it is that you're leveraging. You know what you're about in these sprints. So we often talk about trying. I'm going to try harder. Yeah. And when we think about trying, we usually have 2 results. 1, we might succeed. 2, we might fail. And typically when we're trying something new, we often are more concerned with the fact that we're probably going to fail. So when we try to do something, in my opinion, we're setting ourselves up for failure, because try usually has a negative connotation. Like, I'm trying, Mom. I tried to put my clothes in the laundry. They just didn't make it. Baloney, by the way. We know what happened there. Those clothes didn't make it in the laundry. So we must practice. So we've got to practice. So one of my mantras is we practice eradicating the word try from our vocabulary. And in a 90-day sprint, we practice getting better. It takes about 66 days to build a habit. So I think, well, if it takes 66 days to build a habit, well, let's go 90, because we're going to hone it in. We're definitely going to make sure that we've got, it's kind of like a cherry on top. And I do like cherries on top. So 90-day sprints where you decide, hey, in 90 days, this is what I'm going to focus on. One of the things I love to do is planning and podcasting. So if you're launching a podcast, you can launch a podcast in 90 days. If you're launching a time management system, if you will, you can do that in 90 days. So let's say we kind of do that in the summer when we send our kids back to school. We say, okay, we've got about 90 days in the summer and we're going to launch them in the fall to go back to school. So we're planning for it. We're getting supplies, we're getting clothes, we're figuring out where they're going to go, whether they go to an actual school or you homeschool them. You're doing some prep work. And you can do really good prep work in 90 days. So that's the basis of saying, whatever that thing is that God's laid on your heart, hey, I need to move forward. It might be in relationship building. I really need to work on my marriage this 90 days. It's really important. So for 90 days, I'm going to pray for my husband. I'm going to do something different. I'm going to be uncomfortable, but I'm going to do it for 90 days and watch and see. That's a great one, by the way. Watch and see what God does in that 90 days.
First of all, I always use the word try. So I'm going to practice using the word practice instead of use the word try. And I never thought about it like just making your relationship part of a goal as well. Like my husband and I are really intentional with meetings and I think loving one another, but I never thought about it as like, it could be as simple as the goal is to pray for your husband for 90 days. I love that.
Yeah.
Okay, so tell us a little bit more. You mentioned the Bible, and in our little pre-interview chat, you mentioned something about resolutions, which is a word, that starts coming up here. Like, okay, well, what is going to be your New Year's resolutions? And you can start preparing for that in advance. Like some of us, especially those that are listening, are most likely overachievers, and you guys are like, give me the practical tips so I can start right now. Give me the 1, 2, 3s and the ABCs. And we start thinking about those resolutions. But why is that a dirty word for yourself?
Well, first off, you're my people. I love how you do
this. Okay.
I love it. And also tactical. Like, I don't want to talk theoretical here.
No.
I want to talk tactical. So resolutions, I love in scripture where Daniel resolved not to defile himself, essentially. So he made a resolution in advance before everybody else did. He said, oh, this is where God is leading me. I'm going to resolve. So I'm going to stand firm. Whereas January 1, New Year's Eve, before January 1 comes around, everybody's on the dance floor, drinking the drinks, smoking the smokes, whatever they're doing. And, oh yeah, I'm going to make a New Year's resolution to do this thing. And there's no pre-decision. I want to decide in advance that this is the direction that I want to go. So when you make a resolution, let's not make them of the secular kind, which is on New Year's Eve. Let's make them at a different time. And what you and I were talking about is God has laid on my heart about these 90-day sprints that don't do it the way the world does it. Instead, do it differently. Do it the way I taught my people. So the New Year's is when Passover comes around, when that new moon rolls around. I thought, I'm going to organize my sprints not in the typical quarters. So, for example, if we were to start a sprint for time management, then we would be talking about it in October, planning for November, December, and January. So when everybody else is scurrying around about, oh my gosh, where are we going for Thanksgiving dinner? How are we celebrating the holidays? Who are we celebrating them with? What are we doing at the beginning of the new year? Do I need to pull out my planner then? No, you're already done. And there's so much confidence that you experience when you're done before everybody else is rushing to do this thing. So when we do sprints, we do them not in the typical quarters. We do them outside of that because you know how it's recommended that when you make a new decision, you go to a new place to make new decisions? Kind of like stepping outside of that norm to say, we're not in it with the crowd that can sway us. We're pre-deciding to do something different because that's what successful people do.
Also, what I'm hearing, Jen, is that it doesn't necessarily have to be a goal or a project. Could be your calendar.
Yeah.
Like we are planning 90 days in advance to be very purposeful and intentional.
Yes.
Which I do think is obedient as well. My husband and I have this joke going on when people are like, I just feel so stressed out about Christmas, which by the way, I'm in retail, so I get that. But it's like, it's really funny because it comes around the same time every year. Why? Like, why do we allow this to happen when we could pre-plan? And I like that you were saying too, like pre-plan where you're going, who you're celebrating with. It doesn't have to be necessarily a project to operate a 90-day sprint, but rather a mindset and a calendar review of how you're going to do the next 90 days.
Yeah, for sure. And it has me thinking about, so before I moved to full-time working with entrepreneurs, I was working with stepmoms. And the holidays are really crisis-filled opportunities. And so to reduce that, to say, hey, the kids are going to be when, I would encourage moms to go look at the parenting plan, look at the court order that says, hey, this is the plan that you follow. See, that's already a pre-decision. So you may not need to even stress over what it is that you're going to do. So if you're in a blended family, and about 50% of our listeners are in blended families. So if you're in a blended family, think about that too. So you don't fight with your hunka about what's going on with the kids, because that just sucks all the joy out of events that are designed to be joy-filled and celebratory.
Okay, so tell me more about the Hebrew calendar. You mentioned the moon, but I'm baffled.
Yeah.
Tell me about that.
Yeah, Passover is the beginning of the year. So that's usually March/April timeframe. So
Yes.
if you plan in April, then you're planning for May, June, and July, versus we would say January, February, March, April, May, June.
Yes.
So it's shifting that time frame.
Which also is a big relief, because I think there's a lot of pressure, as we all are like overachievers, and we want to do this. And we're like, okay, on January 1, because it's too late in the year now, which guys, I dare you. It is still 5 more months until January. Do you know how many things you can accomplish in 5 months? So stop saying like, it's going to have to be a next year thing. But in that same breath, you guys, I would also give you permission to set it aside if there's a lot of things right now, like emotionally and relationally, that you're working through. However, I will not let you have the excuse of like, I'm going to push that off, when there could be some progress towards it, even at 1%. So that being said, what does the rest of the year look like with the Hebrew calendar? Obviously, March starting it. So then you do April, May.
Yeah, it depends on when Passover falls. So it's more often in April, but I think this last year, I think it was in March. It was at the very end of March.
Yeah.
So I'm just going with that I'm shifting it one to be able to move. So again, October, you're planning for November, December, and January. And those are 3 big months that you've planned in advance. So when you come in January, you're planning for February, March, and April. And then when you come in April, you're planning for May, June, and July. So it feels like you're ahead of the game, because you're already pre-planning the next year in the prior year versus starting January 1st.
Which was just such a relief. Like, I find myself breathing out going, okay, that is. And we do that in my retail business because we are planning out our content, and we plan our content out 6 months in advance, actually. And we all do take a deep breath out because of the intentionality of like, and I know what I need to start making. I know what I need to start designing. I know what I need to start collecting. It's so intentional that's why we've ended up being more intentional in my family planning as well, because it's so much less stress. It's so much less stress. So don't get hung up by the April, March, and whatever, you guys. Just get hung up, if you will, on thinking through the next 90 days and planning a month ahead what the next 90 days would look like.
Yeah. So, as entrepreneurs, especially, we get drawn to a lot of different shiny objects, and I'm all about eliminating distraction. So if you're thinking, oh gosh, I don't have time to do that today, that's actually really good. That means you've planned your day, that you've said, I have already committed this time to do these things. I mean, the reason that you and I are here today is because we pre-decided that we were going to show up today. We picked a mutually convenient spot that worked on our calendars to say, this is what we're going to do today. So imagine what would happen when you don't show up. Think about your kids' recital. You're planning for that. You're going to move other things out of the way. So if your relationship is really in a difficult spot right now with your kid or with your spouse or with your mother-in-law, any relationship that you want to work on, you have to decide, what do I want out of this relationship? And when you ask yourself that question, it's really more, how do I want to show up? Because that other person in the relationship may not want anything to do with you. Especially if they're in the teeny bopper phase, it's really challenging. So regardless of what they do, you can ask yourself the question, how do I want to show up? So if relationship is something you want to work on in the next 90 days and your calendar is full today, great job. Decide when it is that you're going to revisit this to plan for a 90-day sprint in this one particular area.
As women, we're pulled in every direction, and we often put pressure on ourselves to do all and be all. We may feel overwhelmed or isolated and wonder, is it just me? Do other women feel this way too? God Hears Her from Our Daily Bread Ministries is a community of women who, through honest conversations, personal stories, and biblically based resources, encounter God's grace and flourish together as a sisterhood in Christ. Visit GodHearsHer.org to experience podcasts, blogs, devotionals, and more that encourage us to lean on Jesus, the one who turns life's messiness into meaning. Again, that's GodHearsHer.org.
It's, it's the oldest concept that there is. You're putting in the big rocks first. You're being intentional about the things that matter to you so that the little tiny rocks of all the things and all the to-do lists do eventually make it in there, but you're being intentional about the things that will change things for generations to come if we're talking relationally.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, there really is nothing new under the sun. However, it does take somebody. Sometimes we're in a space where we can't receive it, then we're not quite ready. So I'm praying that you're ready to receive it now. That first you have to accept the fact that you are where you are right now, and it's all good. You have to acknowledge it without a whole lot of judgment. So if you don't like where you are right now, that's great. Congratulations. That's intelligence for you. So that's a piece of information that you can say, I don't like where I am right now. Well, then ask yourself some more questions. Why and try. They rhyme. This is good. So another soapbox. We don't ask why. Because whenever we ask why, we get defensive. So why didn't you show up to my recital? And you want to defend your position versus, gosh, what prevented you from getting to the recital? Well, maybe you had a car accident and you couldn't make the recital, for example. But what prevented you? It could be that you didn't plan your time well. Well, you can fix that. You can't change a car accident, but you can change how you manage your time. So that's why I'm saying it's intelligence for you. Wherever you are right now, ask yourself, well, what happened? Not why did I get here, but how did I get here? What happened?
I like that. So changing it from the why to how and what, which is much more actionable. As we all know, we are like actionable people. Give us the things. That is much more actionable than thinking about the question why. That's a tough one.
Sure. I propose the most powerful pre-decision that you can make is regularly asking yourself each week, how can I leverage my time and my talent with others to create great outcomes that are aligned with my goals?
I love it because that is allowing you to be super intentional. It's a pre-decision. Okay, this week, if these are my goals, do the things that I have lined up this week get me to that end result, whether it's relationally or professionally or personally? Like, okay, if I have a goal that I'm going to work out 56 more times before January, or I'm just going to work out more, do you have workouts scheduled?
Yeah, and let's not say more. The 56 times is better because you can measure that. You can't really measure more.
True.
Like, did I do more?
True.
I mean, we can measure more when there's more weight that doesn't fit in our pants. That one's easy to measure. But I'm going to work out more, maybe not quite so easy.
Guys, I know that's in the weeds. So if immediately you're like, ew, I got a really easy resource to do this. And I have hyper used it, including my family. And that's our habit tracker. It's a free resource on our website, encouragerpodcast.com. Because when I wrote down like, okay, I want to run an XYZ mile, note that I'm not saying it out loud because I have not achieved it, guys. And I don't even know if I'll do it. I'm trying so hard. I'm not trying. I am practicing, Jen. I am practicing so hard, but we'll see if I can get it. But anyways, listing that on there and being very specific about what that means, it is so good. The things that I have accomplished this year, both relationally, professionally, and personally, because I have actual like data written down about what I am following. And it also helps me on the ones where I'm not quite getting there, including my mile run goal. It's basically sprinting it and I haven't gotten there yet. But it's helping me know like, well, actually you haven't been running enough, plain and simple. Like here's your calendar and you said you do X amount of miles by August 30th and you're 50 miles short. I mean, it's feedback for sure. And I'm like, okay, well, that's actually what's going on. So it actually fuels me. I mean, it does disappoint me a little bit, but the blame's on me and I can fix that.
Yeah. Yeah. I really think there are three things that we can leverage. So we can leverage the learning. So we're reading books, we're listening to podcasts, we're taking courses so we can leverage the learning. We can leverage our wins and we can leverage our failures. Like my most epic fail was when I was resigned fired. And I think about that and I had a year-long identity crisis. I thought, oh, well, I don't think I can do anything now. What can I do if I failed at that? It permeated everything else. And it was intel for me, but I was so wounded. And here's the thing, we're going to get hurt in business and life. We're going to get hurt. And eventually we're going to work our way back out. And when I reflect on that time now, as much as I never want to experience that year-long struggle again, I learned so much about who God was and who God made me to be and the direction that he was moving me. I mean, that's why I say I'm an accidental entrepreneur. I am. I had no intention. It never was on my radar to be an entrepreneur. And God used some things in my life, particularly that, to move me to entrepreneurship. And now it's my jam. I absolutely love this stuff.
Oh, yeah. Once you drink the Kool-Aid of entrepreneurship, you are in. So I think it's a really good mindset shift, is not looking at failure or a disappointment and going down that rabbit hole of I'm a failure, but rather like, okay, this is intel. I call it data. This is data for me to take a look at and evaluate. And if you can turn it into that black and white concept, it is much easier to process it. And like you said, I don't want to do it again. I don't want to do some of my failures again. But if I'm able to look back and go, okay, well, what can I learn from this? What am I responsible for? How will I not repeat this again? It's much easier to move forward.
In your habit tracker, for example, there's no emotion there. It's either a check or not a check. So we bring the emotion, and how we're feeling about stuff is really important too. It's also intelligence for us. It's also data for us to say, okay, gosh, my stomach is all tied up in knots. Well, what created that? What caused that? Was it because, gosh, you met somebody that you were estranged with and you didn't know what to do? You kind of froze and your stomach was in knots and you didn't feel good about that? Okay, it goes back to, how do you want to show up? By the end of this week, what do you want to say about how you showed up this week? That's a question you can ask yourself. So do you want to show up with a spirit of generosity? Do you want to show up with a sourpuss face? Do you want to show up being connected in your relationships? Do you want to show up being withdrawn from the people around you? How do you want to show up? You decide. And when, again, that pre-decision, when we put it in our head, this is why that bridging that gap, that 18 inches from our head to our heart, is so critical for us to understand that the heart and the head are always wrestling. And that's that whole battle with the flesh and battle with the spirit. And we have this opportunity to feel like we have a little bit more control, because let's face it, we have very little control, but there are things that we do have control over, like saying, hey, over the next 90 days, I want to practice this thing. We definitely can pre-decide to do that. We might not do it well, but we're going to have some sort of analytic tools to help us determine, what does well look like. We have to define, well, what does doing it well look like? So for example, when I'm working with a client to launch their podcast, it looks like they actually launched their podcast. There's something measurable there. So if they don't show up and they don't do the work to create their podcast, they're not going to launch in 90 days, which would be kind of silly, because you've made this decision, this time investment, this money investment to say, hey, I want to launch my show, but then you don't show up for yourself. And the only one who's going to show up for you is you. Nobody else is going to show up.
This, from now on, you guys, I want you to really, wherever you are, wherever you're listening to this, I want you to today, you know how I feel about tally marks, everybody. So every time you say the word try, or even if you hear your family say the word try, I want you to tally it. And then take a little evaluation and go, oh my word. It was said 10 times today. It was said 5 times today. And then get in the practice of saying practice instead of try. It's such a gentle mind shift, but such a powerful one to remind us that trying, I mean, you can't measure it. It does seem unending. It seems exhausting just saying it, but practicing. We've all done something that we practice at and got better at.
Yeah, for sure.
Start using the word practice, tally, because then you just have a little note to yourself. You got data. You've got analytics about how long you're saying the word trying, and then really stop asking the question why, but how and what. I think that's also a very powerful prayer stance as well, to like, okay, how am I going to enter into this, God? How can you help me figure this out? And what do you want of me? What is it that I can do to change the next 90 days? Those are great questions to ask before you start your 90-day sprint. And I also like that you're talking frequently about podcasting, because podcasting is now a huge trend. I think both Jen and I were probably doing it before. It seems like everyone is podcasting, and I love it, you guys. I think it's a great medium. I love gaining information on every trip I make to every activity. I love it. But if you really are, and it's been laid on your heart and you're like, wait, I could launch this podcast that I've been thinking about for a while in 90 days, Jen would be the one you want to go with, because first of all, she loves Jesus, and she encourages you in the 90 days to say your message that maybe has been laid on your heart for quite some time. You just didn't know how to get started. And so, Jen, where do they go if that's one of the things they want to start?
Yeah, you can find everything at coachjenrogers.com. And recently, in my last episode, in fact, that I recorded, I said, go to coachjenrogers.com. Now, there's no D in my name, because if there were a D in my name, I might be married to a very famous quarterback. which I'm not. I'm married to a PhD student in seminary. So that's the only D, I suppose, in the PhD. So go to jenrogers.com.
Got it. And we will put it in the show notes so you can find the right coach. But guys, let's practice it this week. Let's listen to the things that we're saying to ourselves. Let's stop putting it off till January 1. If you use the Hebrew calendar or use the Scott family calendar, whatever you're using, think through, how could I be more intentional, make these pre-decisions to start practicing and not trying and not putting things off. If it's been laid on your heart, let's be obedient. Let's be obedient to what that is. And if it is a podcast, make sure to reach out to Jen Rogers here. Okay. We always end the podcast by saying, Jen, how would you encourage our encouragers?
I love it. So as a chief encourager, I want to encourage you to know that you also can be a chief encourager. And it comes from starting with the source. And the source is not the universe. The source is not, but one person. And that's the Lord. So I want to encourage you and let you know that no matter where you are on your business journey, the Lord loves you and He is smiling upon you. And if you do not feel that smile upon you, go deeper. Go deeper. Maybe there's some shame that you need to work through. Maybe there's some hurt. Maybe there's something that you've just been working on for so long and you're ready to throw in the towel. I mean, who hasn't said I quit? So I want to encourage you to keep going, keep leaning into the one who saves, the one who gives you all those creative ideas, the one who nourishes your soul to show up on a podcast, to encourage other people. Keep leaning into the one who loves you the most.
Yeah. Oh, thank you so much. Okay. Until next time, encouragers, we got this because He's got us. Thanks so much for tuning in. If the Encourager podcast has helped or encouraged you in any way, please subscribe to the show and leave a 5-star review. And then help us spread the message of encouragement and hope by sharing the podcast with others. Ready to bring more organization and joy into your life? The Encourager Academy helps you harmonize your home and work life through our online course and coaching programs. Our 5-system approach, me, food, family, work, and home, tackles your biggest obstacles, offering lifetime access to video lessons and guided worksheets. Learn at your own pace with practical tools and strategies. Enroll now at encourageracademy.com and use code WeGotThis for $50 off.
Jesus wants our fears to launch us toward faith. Then He grins and says, "Do you trust me? Because together we can do this." With Mornings with Jesus, you can start your day in a positive way. Find hope through inspirational stories and scripture. Go to lifeaudio.com or search your favorite podcast app for Mornings with Jesus. You can also download the Abide app for biblical meditations at abide.com.